everybody in the world.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again, if you want to keep updated with this show and all the other shows around the network, consider liking, following, and subscribing to both my show, other shows, and the network as a whole. That is greatly appreciated by all. But if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly throughout its duration, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great ways always to get your opinions on air. You can do the same through our website, gsmcpodcast.net, and it's also a good way to leave a tip or donation if you do feel so inclined. Anything you do through these features makes the show that much better, and it is genuinely appreciated by all concerned here at the network. Without further ado, let us jump right into our second segment of the day, talking about how and why I believe the Ravens can win the Super Bowl. We talked about the Chiefs and Bills yesterday, and I wanted to highlight the Baltimore Ravens as well because they're amongst the big three of the AFC's elite. We can't deny that. Lamar Jackson is potentially going to win his third MVP award this season. But there's a reason as to why the Baltimore Ravens haven't won before, and it's because of that very same man, Lamar Jackson. But if there's a year where Baltimore can finally break through, why not this one? Because I do think there's more balance to the squad than there was last year, and the defense, which was a concern towards the middle of the season, has improved down the stretch as well, allowing some of the fewest points in the entire league. So there are reasons to believe that if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan or someone who's been following the Ravens all season, that they can really hoist the Lombardi yet again. And so, without further ado, let's jump right into the many ways that I think the Ravens do have a good shot at this thing. Let's start off with talking about the form that they're in. We talked about how the defense has kind of fallen off compared to last year under Mike Macdonald's reign. They lost a couple of pieces, Patrick Queen being a huge reason as to why this defense early on declined steadily. But right now, heading into the postseason, they've looked better than ever. They've allowed, I believe, only 11.4 points over these last 4 games. It's really shown how this Baltimore Ravens defense can attack you. And it all starts in the secondary. When last year it started up front, now these guys in the back end are really holding up in coverage. And it's a big reason as to why I think a lot of these opposing passing attacks have to account for that. Guys on the outside like Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins are true lockdown corners, and it really forces teams to focus on the middle of the field where you're more prone to turnovers if you're an offense. And so I think that's a major reason as to why I think this Ravens defense can be special down the stretch in the postseason. And then on the offensive side of things, there's more balance to this attack than there was last year, where Lamar really had to do a lot more than he's doing this year. Obviously, he's still performing at a high level, still performing at an MVP caliber level, but he also now has Derrick Henry in the backfield to balance everything out. But a huge reason as to why their Super Bowl candidacy might have taken a hit is paramount to not just what I think of them throughout all the games they might have to play in order to get to the Super Bowl, but this specific game against the Steelers. Zay Flowers is out because of that knee injury sustained about 2 weeks ago, so that's going to be an unfortunate loss for them. But in terms of why I think now is different, I just think that Lamar is trusting a lot of these guys a lot more than he did last year. Remember, Zay Flowers was a rookie last year, and he made a lot of rookie mistakes that cost them, especially in that AFC Championship game, especially in last year's postseason. But now, even that he's out and hopefully will come back, he started to trust a lot of guys in the system. For example, Rashad Bateman has really shown himself as a vertical threat downfield. He still trusts Mark Andrews, who is as reliable as any tight end in the NFL right now. Isaiah Likely as well, another one of these big physical tight ends he's really grown to trust. And so we see a lot more versatility in this offense as well. And let me remind you of Justice Hill as well. It's not just Derrick Henry you have to worry about, whose physical style of running the football wears defensive down. You have to worry about this kind of scat back in Justice Hill, who's brilliant receiving the football out of the backfield. He's one of the best receiving backs, in my opinion, in the entire NFL. And that just makes this Ravens attack that much more dangerous and fearsome headed into this postseason compared to last year's. And yes, we have to talk about, if we talk about the Ravens in the postseason, Lamar Jackson's record, and especially against the Steelers team, who, while they haven't played each other in the playoffs in the Lamar Jackson era, have had their number in the Lamar Jackson era and in the playoffs as well. And so that has to be planted in a lot of people's minds right now, right? The fact that, yes, this Ravens offense looks much different from last year. There are more ways that they can control the game, more ways that Lamar Jackson feels confident in the downfield passing game. But you still have to remember this bad record in the postseason. And ultimately, if the Baltimore Ravens do end up losing before the Super Bowl or in the Super Bowl, I just think that a stigma surrounding Lamar Jackson will only grow. And I think that even if he wins the MVP award, nothing is more justified than winning the Super Bowl if you are a two-time MVP, because every single two-time MVP up to this point, outside of Lamar Jackson, has won a Super Bowl. So that stigma is only going to continue to grow if he can't get it done this year. But we have to remember that in the AFC, I do feel a lot of these teams, while are heavily reliant on their defenses, don't necessarily like the style of football that the Ravens play. What I mean by this is, I do feel like the fact that Lamar Jackson's a dual threat running quarterback, and that Derrick Henry is so powerful in his style of running, that I feel like these AFC teams who are more focused, I guess, on turning the ball over rather than, actually trying to stop the run or certain aspects of what Baltimore does, really plays into the hands of what Baltimore can do. And yes, Zay Flowers against this Pittsburgh defense that, yes, has looked sloppy over the past couple of weeks, but still a very, very aggressive, passionate defense in its own right, is a huge loss. And it will factor into how I think about this game from now until tomorrow night. But I do think that there are more ways to compensate for these injuries, for these pratfalls in their offense once they arrive, that the Baltimore Ravens can produce. And so that's why I feel like, in terms of any opposing defenses the Ravens might have to face on their path to the Super Bowl, I'm not necessarily too concerned about their point production. And then on the defensive side of things, going back to them, I do think that those cover corners really create a conundrum for a lot of these quarterbacks. A lot of these quarterbacks that they're going to have to face, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, are very disciplined in taking what you give them. But I do think that they always have to think about guys like Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins in the back end, in the back of their minds, in terms of how they attack, because Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins have been remarkable down the stretch of the season. And so, with those two cover corners and this pass rush that's also been getting home, I do think Baltimore has the steady improvements on hand needed for this deep run through the postseason. And so, even though they don't have a lot of pieces from last year on the defense side of the football, they don't even have their defensive coordinator from last year, Mike McDonald, they still can find ways to really stifle a lot of these powerful AFC quarterbacks on their side of the bracket. And then let's talk about if they get to the Super Bowl, hypothetically. All of the guys in the NFC, I actually think, are being underestimated in terms of their abilities, especially guys like Stafford, guys like Mayfield, guys like Daniels, to really stress his defense. But I just think that any game the Ravens are in, whether it be against some of those guys or against the heavy favorites like the Lions and the Eagles, I just feel like they're prepared for any kind of game the Lions or Eagles might throw at them. I think that if it were the Eagles they face in the Super Bowl, that they match up pretty well, both offensively and defensively. And I think that Lamar's versatility and Derrick Henry's power really stifles a Philly defense that takes a lot away. And I think that Philly will become a little bit too over-aggressive. And if that game turned into a rock fight, then I could really see the Baltimore Ravens grounding it out through retaining the football through Derrick Henry. And then, if it's the Lions you face, that one seemingly will be a little bit more high-scoring. And so, in turn, I feel like Lamar Jackson and this passing attack can really match up very well with this decimated Lions defense. And defensively, I feel like Jared Goff, yes, has protected the football better than anyone on the NFC side of the bracket, but still is prone to some bad decision that could swing a football game in an opponent's favor. So Baltimore will be really looking to that. But ultimately, all of these are hypotheticals. What I'm trying to say here is that the Baltimore Ravens are not like last year's team. And that makes a huge difference as to why this could be a will in terms of winning the Super Bowl. But ultimately, I feel like the best aspect of this Ravens team is that no matter what, they can play any kind of football game. They can get dragged through the mud by a physical defense and come out on the other side victorious, or they can put up many points, give up a lot of points, and ultimately come on top in that regard as well. And I feel like, all the questions that we have about this Ravens offense, will they stagnate at some point like they've done against far less or inferior opponents? Will they really be able to match up with the Chiefs defensively or the Bills defensively come the championship game time? And other questions of that concern. But ultimately, I think that right now, there's no team in the NFL playing like the Baltimore Ravens, both offensively and defensively, with what you have to be concerned about if you're an opposing offense or defense. So that's why I think the many multifaceted aspects of this Ravens team make them as dangerous as anyone on either side of the bracket. And I really do think that they can make a run at it this year. Yes, they're going to be tested against the Steelers yet again. Yes, you can't overlook Lamar's record in the postseason. But I do think this team is rounding into form at the exact right time. And yes, hopefully they get Zay Flowers back and it will make a big difference. But I do think that no matter what, this team is well equipped to handle anything and any adversity in its path. So that is why I believe the Baltimore Ravens can and probably will win this year's Super Bowl. But let me know what you think about them in the comments below, because coming up next, we are continuing looking at NFL's Wild Card Weekend, starting off with the 7-2 matchup in the AFC. Potential opponent for the Ravens in the next round, the Broncos and the Bills. Should be an interesting, intriguing matchup there. We'll be right back after this short break.